So now, my friends, we are finally to the beginning of the end. And that is this film situation, Benito Mussolini, and the big purge. So this is what the situation kind of looks like. So Hanfstaengl was working as a producer on a propaganda film. Again, he was, from high society, so he was kind of like privileged in his access and money and whatnot. And I guess he saw where the party was becoming so crazy, he just kind of wanted to be away from that whole environment. So he's doing this film. It's about the revolution and recent history, right? Because of course that's one of the first things you do, right? Try to write history, so it favors you. And they're out filming a fighting scene in a Berlin suburb. I don't remember the exact name, but the suburb was largely communist. And that was part of the reason so much fighting went on there. And it was still largely communist by this point in Nazi history. So it's like there's a big communist holdout. All these big ranking Nazis are there. There's, SS officers and police officers and people in costume and uniforms, all this crazy stuff. So the communists, they see all the Nazis coming out to do this propaganda film, and they just start beating the crap out of them. It must have been such a scene. And Hanfstaengl, being the absolute madman that he is, him and the other filming guys, they YOLO it, and they just start filming the real fighting. And he even says, this was some great footage. This was better footage than we ever could have acted. So it turned into a pretty good thing, at least according to Hanfstaengl. So the film ends up turning out really great. Now Joseph Goebbels sees it, and he gets it blocked from being shown because he's jealous. He doesn't want anyone else to be making really good stuff, especially, Hanfstaengl him and Goebbels butted heads quite a bit. He really doesn't like Goebbels, and, Goebbels does everything he can to block this film, which is really bad because it was very expensive to make. So Hanfstaengl is kind of stuck in this weird situation where he has spent quite a bit of government money, and he's got this film now that Goebbels doesn't want anyone to see. So that is the conundrum that Hanfstaengl finds himself in. So he tries to use it as an excuse to go see Benito Mussolini, the dictator of Italy, right? Il Duce. And he goes down there, but he also has an ulterior motive. You see, he's trying to talk Mussolini into meeting with Hitler, so he can sit Hitler down and kind of set him straight. Get him off of this drunken Nazi cocktail that Hitler's just been binge drinking for years now. And hopefully Hitler can begin to see reason. That was Hanfstaengl's hope. Again, the film thing, kind of secondary to him. I think that the film actually did working out. Mussolini was on board with that, and Hanfstaengl ended up making some money back from that for the government. But, really he wanted Hitler and Mussolini to meet. And Mussolini agrees. He sent a postcard or a picture back to address to Hitler. So Hanfstaengl comes back and he explains the situation to Hitler. He's like, listen, man, I've got this arrangement for you. We can have a good ally. Things can be really good, especially because relations between the two countries were not very good at this point. History is always very weird because Mussolini and Hitler eventually fought on the same side in World War II, and we assume that it's largely because they were ideologically similar, right? They both very much adhered to fascism. Hitler had a little bit more stuff sprinkled in, but fundamentally they were both fascist states. And it wasn't necessarily inevitable for that to happen. In fact, Mussolini, there was a good chance that he ended up going into World War II on the side of the Allies because Hitler and Germany, they weren't very friendly for a good while. Hitler, he says he's open to it. Maybe at some other time, I'm very busy, very busy. He's always using that excuse. And then relations continued to deteriorate. Things got worse. Not good. Well, a couple weeks later, Hanfstaengl is invited to a Harvard reunion. And at this point, he's always got his eye on America. He's always going on, hey, Hitler, America is good. America is the future. We should be friendly with them. He's trying to go back to this Harvard reunion in the hopes of meeting with President Roosevelt and establishing a connection for Hitler, which would have been a big deal. And of course, when Hanfstaengl is back, he's in America. He's getting questioned by a whole bunch of different people about the Nazi regime. I mean, it was a big fiasco, right? You can go back and see some of the headlines in the newspapers talking about how there's going to be a Nazi at the Harvard reunion, right? It was a big deal, very big to do. And while he's over here in America, Hitler actually meets with Mussolini behind Hanfstaengl's back, which must have felt pretty close to a betrayal, especially because Hanfstaengl wanted to be there so he could guide the conversation to an extent, right? Because there's always a chance that when someone like Mussolini talks to Hitler and tries to get them to see reason, there's always that possibility that Hitler reacts negatively. And that would have been very, very bad for Germany. Just imagine, they had him and Mussolini butt heads. They have completely opposite personalities. They clash. And then, lo and behold, Italy is on the side of the Allies in World War II. Totally could have happened. And it's actually while Hanfstaengl is in the United States that the first big purge happens. And I believe this was the Night of the Long Knives when the Strasser brothers and the left-leaning faction and a whole bunch of conservative German politicians, they just got completely purged, murdered, slaughtered, done away with. And they're not a problem anymore. The voices of some of them were, voices of reason, right? So Hanfstaengl was completely caught off guard. He had no idea this was coming. And a lot of people in America questioned him about it. So again, there's this very bitter feeling that Hanfstaengl gets where, he's a high-ranking guy in this government, and here the government is doing stuff that he has no idea about. Foreigners in America, journalists are asking him, hey, can you comment on this? You're a Nazi, you're in this government. Can you tell us what's going on here? And he's like, hopefully it's a mistake. He was just completely caught off guard. Again, it must have been so frustrating to have been Hanfstaengl throughout this entire situation. Now, there was one point when he actually talks to an old friend from Harvard. He asks about National Socialism, right? Tell me what is this ideology, right? Because I see it, I think it's kind of nuts, but maybe I can hear it from you. We're old friends. Maybe I can see reason on this. So Hanfstaengl writes, quote, "If a car gets stuck in the mud and begins to sink deeper and deeper, and the engine stops, and then a man comes along and pours something into the works which starts it up again, you don't ask what it was he put in. You set to and get the damn thing out." And then his friend replied, quote, "But what happens when the driver gets drunk on it?" And this was a bittersweet moment of realization for Hanfstaengl. Because he says this was one of the moments that kind of got him to see the light, that all hope was lost. The driver was drunk on it. Hitler was completely drunk on this Nazi cocktail that he had been feeding back to the people, and he had constantly reinforced to him by his own inner circle, these fanatics, and it was just not going to get better. It's not going to get better. And I imagine it must have been so frustrating. This has been a big part of Hanfstaengl's life for years by this point. How many? Probably thousands of US dollars in terms of, the amount he's put into this to fund it, and all the support and all the work he's done. He's held positions in this government. And it's completely lost. It's controlled by a crazy drunken fool. And he's going to destroy the nation in the process. So there's this big, terrible purge. Hanfstaengl goes back to Germany. He wants answers. He goes and he meets Hitler and Goebbels to kind of catch up with them. They're staying at a resort in northern Germany near the sea. He goes up and he sees them. "Hey guys, what's up? How you doing? What's the update?" Hitler glares at him, and he says, quote, "There you are. Haven't they done you in yet?" A massive party purge just happened. He sees Hanfstaengl, and the first thing Hitler says is, "Haven't they done you in yet?" I can't even imagine. That must have been terrifying. And Hanfstaengl, of course, this was a very serious and life-changing moment for him right then and there. So I'm just going to quote to you a good paragraph from this little section. Hanfstaengl writes, quote, "I really think I got black spots before the eyes. There was the Mr. too, a deliberately offensive reference to my Anglo-Saxon outlook. It was one of those moments when the impressions of a lifetime flash across one's inner mind like a sped-up film. I suddenly saw a picture of his untidy little flat in the Tierkstrasse and the haggard-looking orator of genius who stood there in the hall, hungry for the beauties and success of life. The long years in between dissolved again into the livid face in front of me. I realized it was a contorted face of a murderer defiantly at bay, a pathological murderer who had tasted blood and acquired an appetite for more. Through the window came the vague and familiar sounds of a seaside resort. I pulled myself together with a shudder. What does one answer in such circumstances? What does one answer in such circumstances? Hanfstaengl never gets an answer on what happened with the Purge, why it took place, who exactly was even killed. I mean, for a long time, people didn't even know how many people died. Who exactly was killed? I mean, you just don't know these things. No clear answer ever came. And Hanfstaengl says that this was the parting of the ways. That he could have forgiven the other flaws up until this point, but there was a real feeling that he got that he was supposed to have been done in. He was also supposed to be purged. But he was in America. He lucked out. I just can't imagine how scary that must have been. I mean, that must be terrifying. Imagine the person that controls your country looks at you and says, right after a purge, and says, "Haven't they done you in yet?" That's wild. This memoir has been such a roller coaster, man. And then he starts talking a little bit about the psychology of Hitler. And he talks about beliefs and obsessions, and how even false ones can foster superhuman energy. But they also destroy your judgment at the same time. And he thinks that is what happened with Hitler. He was completely intoxicated on the Nazi cocktail. Drunk on power. Drunk on that cocktail. And he had superhuman energy while he was doing it, but he had no judgment anymore. No more moral compass. His internal moral compass became the party line. And it was a sad realization, because what do you do now? All right, Hanfstaengl, he's been working in this government now, helped the party come to power. Now they're in power, and it was a sad realization, because what do you do now? All right, Hanfstaengl, he's been working in this government now, helped the party come to power. Now they're in power, and he realizes that they're gangsters, psychotics, crazy, evil people, terrible people. And well, what do you do? What do you do? What do the Germans do? I mean, this isn't just him. I mean, there are plenty of otherwise good people that are in this country. What do? They can't all abandon their lives and leave. And it was a really difficult situation. They just kind of had to live through it. He says something really fascinating. Hanfstaengl writes, quote, "The tragedy of an orator became the tragedy of his listeners." The German people who had heard Hitler speak were about to live through some very tough times.